So I'm here to introduce our esteemed professor this evening. Dr. Patricia Hewlin is an associate dean and professor in the Desautels Faculty of Management. Prior to joining academia and pursuing a career as a social scientist, she was vice president at Citigroup, where she managed financial centers here in New York. Professor Hewlin conducts research on how organizations' members and leaders engage in authentic expression, as well as factors that impede authenticity in the workplace. Her research has primarily centered on employee silence and the degree to which members suppress personal values and pretend to embrace organizational values. Dr. Hewlin is published in numerous academic journals and has also contributed to the Globe and Mail, Huffington Post, and Harvard Business Review. Please join me in welcoming Professor Hewlin.
Thank you, everyone. How is everyone? How are you doing? Good, good, good. I'm doing great as well. It is so nice to be here, to be home. I am a native New Yorker, born and raised in Queens, and ooh, some Queens girls here. I also lived on the Upper West Side for a number of years before working at McGill and joining the Faculty of Management. I just would like to start by thanking Rena and the board for organizing this fantastic event. And the bonus is that I see a number of my former students. And so it's just fantastic to be here. McGill has a long history of young women coming together on campus and student organizations and networking, and it continues beyond the campus into bonding and alumni associations such as the one that we are having here tonight. So thank you again. Ladies, and friends of ladies and some gentlemen in the room, let's talk about authenticity. Authenticity is the alignment of your internal sense of self and your actions. Now, your internal sense of self can be your values, your beliefs, those ideas that are core to who you are. That is your internal sense of self. And so I've been dealing with this concept of authenticity for close to 20 years, and it is actually a very complex endeavor. But before we dig into it a bit, I have to share a story that relates to my daughter. She's 11, but when she was 8, she was beginning to ask questions about, Mommy, what do you really do? And what is tenure? Because when she was 8, I was going up for tenure, and that's all she heard. She was like, who is tenure? What is it? And so I was telling her about my research, and she said, well, just be yourself because everyone else is taken. That's from Oscar Wilde. She learned that at school at 8 years old. And it just reminded me of how early, especially for those of us who were born and raised in the Western world, we learned very early that authenticity and being true to ourselves is prime. You hear from Shakespeare to thine own self be true, and then more contemporary statements of be real, do you. When I was younger, there was a song, I didn't even know really what it meant, but I loved it. It was called To Be Real, and it was about, it's by Cheryl Lynn, so I'm really dating myself. But it was about having authentic relationships, that the relationship had to be real. I was singing my heart out at 11, not really knowing, again, what I was singing about. But this notion of being authentic, this notion of being real is ingrained in us. So how many of you were told, oh, just be yourself before you were a teenager? How many? Any of you? All right, actually, fewer than I thought. Well, my parents would say, oh, just be yourself. And it sounds really good, doesn't it? It sounds quite empowering. Yeah, just be yourself. But it's actually quite scary for many of us. Now, some of us jump right in, and we're just as authentic as we could be. But many of us say, whew, maybe not. Maybe it's just easier to just conform. because I don't want to stand out. And a lot of people deal with that in their organizations, in their family, and in other social groups. And the question is, how do we do this thing, authenticity? Because authenticity is actually a good thing. Scholars have shown over the years that when people experience authenticity, they have higher levels of self-esteem, they have lower levels of depression, they have lower levels of stress, and in general, they feel good about themselves. They're satisfied with themselves. And in the context of the workplace, when people feel that they are authentic, they have higher levels of work engagement, which means that they have the energy and the sense of well-being to perform well. So could we agree that authenticity is a good thing? Yeah, or at least it should be a good thing. But there are a few caveats. First of all, authenticity is something where it's not one size that fits all. And oftentimes we feel that if we're authentic, we have to bare our souls. That's not really what I'm talking about with authenticity. What I'm talking about is being true to your internal sense of self, your core values. So let's think about an avocado. How many of you like avocados? I love avocados. But of course, they have to be ripe. So we'll think about it. You may have heard this, Chloe, in class, you remember? And Alexa, Jay may have said this in your class. My husband, Jay, he teaches in the Schulich as well as the Business School and Negotiations class. But the avocado example, I always say that's my idea. So if he said it, it's my idea. I need to copyright it. So anyway, you think about a really nice avocado. It's really soft, right, on the outside. But what's going on the inside of that avocado? Somebody tell me. That core. And tell me about that core. Yeah, it's pretty hard. Celine, you remember too? I knew it. He always steals my ideas. Yeah, we have it on tape. And so basically, as we are developing in our lives, we are somewhat like an avocado. As we develop, we have these values on the periphery. They're malleable. And if we think even 10 years for some of us, and some of us can even think 20 or 30 years ago, and I'm included, some of those perspectives that we had have evolved. They're not quite the same. Those are those malleable values. They're evolving. But then when we look over our lives, our adult lives in particular, we find that there are some core values that have stayed with us over the years. That is the most important part to identify for yourselves. Because if you're not really exercising your core values, you're not going to be quite at the level of well-being as you could be. So when we think about authenticity, we really need to think about core value alignment. And so we have core values that are related to, it could be our culture, it could be our religion, it could be even our work style. Some of us are introverts. We were talking about this earlier. And so if you're an introvert, you may not want to be in an environment where you have to be constantly in front of people all of the time. And if you are an introvert and you are constantly around people all of the time, you're pretty tired by the end of the day. And that doesn't mean you don't love your job, but it does mean that you need to find other opportunities where you can feed that solitude and that part of yourself that needs to be fed so that you can rebuild. There could be values in terms of how you handle your money, in terms of traveling. You know your core values. So as you think about authenticity, and if you're really interested in increasing your level of well-being in terms of your career and in your personal life, I could recommend that you have a conversation with yourself, because we often don't even know ourselves as much as we do. And when we say, oh, just be yourself, it comes back to the question, well, how can I be myself if I really don't know who self actually is? And as women, we are often imposed upon in terms of what girls should think, what girls should do, how women should behave, to the point where our sense of self has been filled with so much imposition that we may not actually know what our core values are. So ladies, I am encouraging you to take some time. Think about what's important to you. What is your core? And then after you do that, ask yourself, to what extent are my core values being exercised in my life, in my career? And the last question would be, what adjustments do I need to make? Do I need to change what I do over the weekends? Or maybe even a bigger change. Do I need to change careers? Do I need to change relationships? That's the beginning of the journey of authenticity. And as I said, one size does not fit all. How you identify what authenticity is and how you exude authenticity will be quite different from what others do. But I encourage you to go through that exercise. And as you're thinking about authenticity, also remember that authenticity is a privilege for some, but it can be quite risky and courageous for others. So just think about, if you're in an environment where everybody looks like you, everybody shares, for the most part, your values, authenticity is really, for the most part, taken for granted, right? You don't even think about it. But think about it when you're the only one, whatever that might be, the only woman, the only African American, or whatever it might be, the only. Then you think, wow, what do I do? Do I conform and try not to play to my difference? Or do I say, hey, I'm different. I'll wear my hair the way I please. I'll say what I please. I will reflect my culture, my sex, my gender, my lifestyle, how I please. It could come with some risk. Or perhaps you have values that are different from those of the organization. Maybe they're related to sustainability. And you're thinking, we need to divest. We need to divest, or we need to change. Our organization needs to change. And bringing up those values that are different from the organization might be a risky endeavor. And so when we say, just be yourself and be authentic, it's riddled sometimes with some risk. But I encourage you to take courage and try some things. Try out your authenticity. Because again, I have found, and this is close to 20 years of research, that when people stretch themselves a bit more and begin to incorporate a bit more of their values in their work and in their lives, it's so much more fulfilling, so much more fulfilling. And the last thing I wanted to talk to you about in terms of authenticity is that when it's done well, it's generative. It produces something. It bears good fruit. Authentic leaders are individuals who freely share their values, they're transparent, and they're open. When you're an authentic leader, people want to follow you, and they're inspired to be authentic as well. Authentic leaders build trusting relationships. Authentic leaders establish positive relationships with their followers. So again, there are so many positive things that can come out with respect to just being a little bit more authentic. What a big difference you will have not only in your life, but in the lives of other people who are just waiting for someone to be real and to show them how to do it. And so the next time you feel that you must tell your friend or your child or your sister or your brother, just be yourself. Give them some guidance. Give them some guidance, because it might cause pressure. And we're thinking we're empowering, we're encouraging. But without instructions, we may be actually placing a lot of pressure. A lot of pressure. So being authentic can actually be empowering if we do it well, if we do it right, and especially if we do it in the context of truly knowing ourselves. It can be a fantastic life. So I chose to pursue this arena because when I was in the corporate world, I found a lot of inauthenticity. I was younger in my 20s, 30s, and still figuring out what to do. And I figured, well, I'll just do what the boys do. I was one of few women in my role, and they were talking about sports, so hey, I'll talk about some sports and not share some of the things that I like to do, like sewing. Ooh, that would be way too stereotypical, right? Cooking, ooh, yeah, of course she likes to cook. She's a woman. Those pressures are real for many, especially for the younger generation. And so I'm happy to be in a place where I am because I left so that I could help and to become a part of a solution to help future leaders become better leaders and current leaders to become better leaders. And so I think I'm going to stop here and open the floor for any questions that you have. And I just want to thank you again for the opportunity to be here and to share with you. Thank you.